Hello, so this is going to be part three of my Alien Doodle. So I'll just play that in the background, and then I think for the commentary on this one, I'm going to read a section from a Nietzsche book, which is Human All Too Human, which is one I'm actually reading at the minute, and I only started reading it yesterday, but I'm going to read, I think, section 12, Dream and Civilization, from page 17. I don't know if that'll be the same in other versions, but it is with this version. So yeah, I'll read through it. It's not a super long paragraph. And then I'll just talk about it and attempt to, I guess, interpret it. Which is probably going to be quite difficult because Nietzsche is a little bit difficult to understand sometimes, but I'm going to give it a go. Okay. Dream and civilization. The function of the brain, which is the most encroached upon in slumber, is the memory. Not that it is wholly suspended, but it is reduced to a state of imperfection, as in primitive ages of mankind was probably the case with everyone, whether waking or sleeping. Uncontrolled and entangled as it is, it perpetually confuses things as a result of the most trifling situations. Yet in the same mental confusion and lack of control, the nations invented their mythologies, while nowadays travellers habitually observe how prone the savage is to forgetfulness, how his mind, after the least exertion of memory, begins to wander and lose itself until finally he utters falsehood and nonsense from sheer exhaustion. Yet in dreams we all resemble this savage. Inadequacy of distinction and error of comparison are the basis of the preposterous things we do and say in dreams, so that we clearly recall a dream, we are startled that so much idiocy lurks within us. The absolute distinctness of all dream images, due to implicit faith in their substantial reality, recalls the conditions in which earlier mankind were placed, for whom hallucinations had extraordinary vividness, entire communities and even entire nations labouring simultaneously under them. Therefore, in sleep and in dream, we make the pilgrimage of early mankind over again. So, I think this is quite an interesting passage. It's very short, but I think it really packs a punch. I guess he's almost saying that earlier civilizations can be tapped into or realised through the means of dreams. So when we have dreams, it's almost like going back to our primate brain. It's like travelling backwards in time almost, because of the absurdity of our dreams and how we can act in such strange and perhaps illogical ways. And I think, based on reading this, you can sort of see how Carl Jung was influenced by Nietzsche with his work on dreams also, because Carl Jung thought that dreams contain archetypes, and archetypes are essentially extremely old ideas, I guess. I don't really know how to explain very good, but there's definitely that sort of narrative throughout this paragraph in this section of the book. I have read a little bit further on by myself, and yeah, there was a really interesting quote that I'm actually going to read here, because I think it really sums up that last paragraph. So this is from Logic of the Dream, section 13, page 19. So, dreams carry us back to the early stages of human culture and afford us a means of understanding it more clearly. So, I feel like Nietzsche thought that dreams were like a gateway into the past. They can teach us things about ourselves that perhaps we wouldn't know otherwise. But I don't know how that would happen, and I don't think he necessarily gives a great explanation as to that in that paragraph. And that's not to say he's not going to in the coming pages, but I just haven't perhaps got to that yet. But there's also interesting stuff in the next paragraph. However, I don't know if I'll have enough time to read it, because it's a little bit longer, but I might just keep on reading on, because it is a very interesting book, and I think these two paragraphs are just, they're just very deep. So I'm going to now read section 13, Logic of the Dream. During sleep, the nervous system, through various inner provocatives, is in constant agitation. Almost all the organs act independently and vigorously. The blood circulates rapidly. The posture of the sleeper compresses some portions of the body. The coverlets influence the sensations in different ways. The stomach carries on the digestive process and acts upon their organs thereby. The intestines are in motion. The position of the head induces accustomed action. The feet, shoeless, no longer pressing the ground, are the occasion of other sensations of novelty, as is, indeed, the changed garb of the entire body. All these things, following the bustle and change of the day, result through their novelty in a movement throughout the entire system that extends even to the brain functions. Thus, there are 100 circumstances to induce perplexity in the mind, a questioning as to the cause of the excitation. Now the dream is a seeking and presenting of reasons for these excitations of feeling, of the supposed reasons, that is to say. Thus, for example, whoever has his feet bound with 2 threads will probably dream that a pair of serpents are coiled around his feet. This is, at first, a hypothesis, then a belief with an accompanying imaginative picture and the argument, these snakes must be the cause of those sensations which I, the sleeper, now have. So reasons the mind of the sleeper. The conditions precedent, as thus conjectured, become, owing to the excitation of the fancy, present realities. Everyone knows from experience how a dreamer will transform one piercing sound, for example that of a bell, into another of quite a different nature, say the report of a cannon. In his dream he becomes aware first of the effect, which he explains by subsequent hypothesis, and becomes persuaded of the purely conjectural nature of the sound. But how comes it that the mind of the dreamer goes so far astray when the same mind, awake, is habitually cautious, careful, and so conservative in its dealings with these hypotheses? Why does the first plausible hypothesis of the cause of a sensation gain credit in the dreaming state? For in a dream we look upon the dream as reality, that is, we accept our hypotheses as fully established. I have no doubt that as men argue in their dreams today, man argued even in their waking moments for thousands of years. The first cause that occurred to the mind with reference to anything that stood in need of explanation was accepted as the true explanation and served as such. Savages show the same tendency in operation, as the reports of travellers agree. In the dream, this atavistic relic of humanity manifests its existence within us, for it is the foundation upon which the higher rational faculty develops itself and still develops itself in every individual. Dreams carry us back to the early stages of human culture and afford us a means of understanding it more clearly. Dream thought comes so easily to us now because we are so thoroughly trained to it through the interminable stages of evolution, during which this fanciful and facile form of theorizing has prevailed. To a certain extent, the dream is a restorative for the brain, which during the day is called upon to meet the many demands for trained thought made upon it by the conditions of a higher civilization. We may, if we please, become sensible, even in our waking moments, of a condition that is as a door and vestibule to dreaming. Okay, so that's not necessarily the end of that paragraph, but I think I'm just going to discuss a bit. I've got about another half page to go, but I think there's some interesting things in here. So, towards the end, I came upon something. So it was this: to a certain extent, the dream is a restorative for the brain, which during the day is called upon to meet many demands for trained thought made upon it by conditions of higher civilization. We may, if we please, become sensible, even in our waking moments, of a condition that is a door and vestibule to dreaming. So that sort of made me think a bit like a bit of Freud. So Freud said that we have an ego, which is essentially, I guess, split up into three parts, or our mind split up into three parts, and this is compartmentalized of the id, which is like our animal brain, and then we have the ego, which is the realization of the self, and then the superego, which is what keeps the id and the ego intact. It allows us to interact with other people in the world in an unselfish manner, I guess. So I guess it's like it's the moralistic part of our brain, and so we have to suppress certain desires, such as our primitive desires, like rage and sex, in order to be able to fit into a higher civilization, as Nietzsche would call it. So perhaps that sort of idea of the higher civilization suppressing our strange tendencies, or our, I guess, aggressive and sexual tendencies, has to be expressed somewhere. We can't just completely push it down and into the depth of our mind. It's got to be unleashed, and perhaps that's one of the purposes of the dream. It's to be able to, I guess, make sense of these desires and urges that we still have, but we're unable to act out. Because if we did act out in bad ways, then we wouldn't necessarily be able to fit into the social order, and if we can't fit into the social order, then we're lacking in an essential part of our being, which is similar to what I was saying in the last video, so I won't go into that too much. But I think maybe Freud might have been influenced by Nietzsche, or maybe that's just my mind making links. But yeah, okay, I found this interesting as well. This is at first a hypothesis, then a belief, with an accompanying imaginative picture and the argument: these snakes must be the cause of those sensations which I, the sleeper, now have. So reasons the mind of the sleeper. So it's almost like when we're in a dream, we're less rational. We're more likely to, I guess, side with the first thought or cause that comes into our head, and then we make our hypothesis. So in the example of having of a man sleeping with ropes tied around his legs, the man may suddenly attribute this to being snakes, and rather than being rational, which is what you probably would in a waking state, in a dream you're more likely just to accept that and perhaps create a visual image of what's happening. So it's almost like a dream mirrors the world, and it mirrors the current world. But Nietzsche also seems to think that a dream mirrors past worlds. However, perhaps it's that instant affirmation of a hypothesis into a belief or into some sort of knowledge that is what our primate ancestors used to do millions of years ago. Perhaps we didn't necessarily have a developed rational faculty which allowed us to think things through and come to logical conclusions. We just jumped to the first conclusion that we came to, and I guess maybe Nietzsche would make the case that that's where religion came from, and this also links to Freud, because I remember doing something at college about Freud and this idea of the totem and offering sacrifices to the gods in order to be able to stop natural disasters or cure things which have gone wrong. And by making offerings, there was almost like a correlation between an action and a consequence. So when these people gave away offerings to the gods then responded, or at least this is the conclusion which was came to, and then the bad thing would subside or go away. So it's almost like that inability to think things through to a logical conclusion. It's just the first conclusion that we come to is the logical one. So that does link to Freud as well. And I think that's quite interesting, actually. And I think it also backs up the idea that that dreams are perhaps a reflection of man's brain millions of years ago, before we were able to use our rational faculties. It's just a way of, I guess, I don't know. I don't know if I don't think the purpose of a dream is to be able to look at what man was like millions of years ago, and women. But I think that's perhaps one of the I guess latent functions of a dream. It's like we can't help that. So a dream must have some other purpose, which I don't really know what that is, because, you know, I don't think anyone truly knows the purpose of a dream. However, I do think it is a way of sorting out things that have gone in our heads, perhaps throughout the day, because I often see a correlation between my dreams and my waking state. So, for example, if I've gone for a walk down to the shop, or if I've been thinking about doing something, I'll often find that sort of theme will pop up in my dream. And I think it's quite interesting. Dreams are very interesting, and I would really like to do some more thinking into this book. So I think if I do a part 4, I might end up just reading some more sections of this book, because they are quite small sections, but there's a lot of information in the small sections. So yeah, I'm kind of out of breath because I've been talking like non-stop for a little while. Yeah, so this is pretty much the end of the video. So yeah, thank you.